One afternoon after lunch, he told the family, "I'll go for a walk." He went out for a walk. Clouds had gathered. It was threatening to rain. Josephine was watching from the window of the cottage. She saw Swamiji coming, and he stood at that fork spot, still, rigid. She was wondering what is happening. And then the rain started pouring. Swamiji got completely wet. Josephine took an umbrella, ran to him, held the umbrella over his head. It rained for half an hour. At the end of that, the rain stopped. 10 minutes later, Swamiji opened his eyes, looked around. He asked Josephine, "Why is the ground so wet?" "Swamiji, it has been raining." "Was it raining?" "Oh, I am sorry, Yum Yum." That is what he used to call her, Yum Yum. "I am sorry, Yum Yum, I didn't notice it." She said, "How is it possible? You know, I had been pestering my Guru for a long time for the experience of Nirvikalp Samadhi, where I am lost in Brahman. Today he got me that experience. I was completely lost to the world." Josephine says, "How can you understand this person? Does he belong to this world, or has he come from some other world?" We start with the prayer. Om Namah Shri Atirajaya.
Om Namah Shri Atirajaya.
Vivekananda Suraye.
Vivekananda Suraye.
Satchit Sukha Swarupaya.
Satchit Sukha Swarupaya.
Swamine Tapaharine.
Swamine Tapaharine.
Robert Ingersoll, a very famous agnostic philosopher and a very popular speaker. He used to draw a large number of crowds. He came to Swamiji's lecture once in New York, and they got attracted to each other, and they used to meet very often, discussing all the time about philosophy. He was an agnostic, not very particular about the existence of the divine. And Swamiji in his lectures was referring all the time to the higher power. So they used to have long discussions. And at the end of a long discussion, both of them would laugh and tell each other, "Let us agree to disagree." They never agreed on this particular topic, but they remained good friends all the time. John D. Rockefeller, have you heard of him? He is the one who got that hotel in New York built, Waldorf Astoria. Once or twice he listened to Swamiji in Chicago and also in New York. One day when he came to Swamiji's lecture, Swamiji was talking about Karma Yoga, and he made a simple sentence. A person who has amassed a lot of wealth does so because of the help from so many people. So he should keep aside a part of his wealth for the welfare of the community. John did not agree. He objected. If people are poor, it is because they are lazy. Does it sound familiar? No?
Yes.
That is what Naren had told Sri Ramakrishna long ago. Now the tables were turned. John was telling it to Swamiji. Swamiji said, "No, people are poor in spite of all these things." John got up and said, "I don't agree with you," and walked out. It was considered a very uncivil behavior. 1 week later, he came to meet Swamiji. His assistant Susan Waldo was in the outer office. Susan told John, "Sir, Swamiji is busy. Please wait. He brushed her aside, went in, threw a check on the table of Swamiji and said, there is a check for $1 million. I have decided to start a foundation for the benefit of needy people. Be happy and be thankful to me. Without lifting the head, Swamiji said, you be thankful to me, I gave you the idea. That was the first foundation of that type to be established in the world. And that was followed by a whole series of foundations. Carnegie Foundation. Carnegie Foundation established Carnegie Mellon University. Not only that, they gave the Americans Carnegie Hall, one of the finest concert halls in the world. Stanford Foundation. What did the Stanford Foundation give? Stanford University. They were all barons of the railways and other kinds of things, steel barons, railway barons, people who became rich by that. And a lot of them followed the example of Rockefeller. There is a very interesting story told about Rockefeller. His son, John D. Rockefeller II, occasionally used to come to New York, and whenever he came there, he would stay in Waldorf Astoria Hotel, his father's hotel, and take the penthouse at the top, the most expensive suite. When John D. Rockefeller, the owner of the hotel, would come there, he would stay in the cheapest room. The manager one day asked John D. Rockefeller, the senior, sir, when you come here, you stay in the cheapest room. Your son stays in the costliest room. Why? And John had a nice reply. He has a rich father. I don't have one. John the First was born a poor boy. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps, and he was the one who started that famous company, Standard Oil, which exists even today, ESSO, E-S-S-O. Remarkable personality. John D. Rockefeller, the third or the fourth, I don't recollect which one, once even stood for election as a vice presidential candidate of the US. He lost. And today in New York, Christmas is celebrated every year in the open by literally the whole city of New York, and that open area is called John D. Rockefeller Plaza. Rockefeller Plaza, it's a huge place. So he's a very well-known figure in the United States. John D. Rockefeller. Professor William James, Professor of Psychology and Philosophy, Harvard University. He listened to Swamiji once in somebody's house in Boston, got attracted, later invited him to Harvard University to address the graduate students of philosophy. Harvard University in those days was considered the best university in the world, Western world, for philosophy, Western philosophy. It boasted of 4 or 5 very famous philosophers. These philosophers had one defect. None of them agreed with the others. A philosopher, a professor would go to the class and say something. Another philosopher, professor would go to the class and say, that man is talking rubbish. That is not the truth. The students used to get confused. And the students got the impression, if a lecture cannot be understood, that lecture must be very profound. So who is a great teacher? The one whom you cannot understand. Swamiji came and gave a lecture on Advaita Vedanta, 2 hours long. According to William James, one of the finest lectures given by Swamiji. At the end of the program, William was walking back home. There were 2 graduate students going ahead of him. He heard their conversation. One boy asked the other, "What's your impression about the speaker of today?" The second one said, so-so. The first one said, "Why? I thought he was pretty good." The second one said, how could he be pretty good? I understood everything. He understood everything, so the speaker must have been so-so. William James makes a remark, Swamiji taught us philosophy professors how to teach philosophy to students to make it understood. He later went on to write a famous book, Varieties of Religious Experience. It is a classic. You know the kind of classic it is? Published in 1895. Its centenary was celebrated in the United States. Can you imagine? Centenary of a book being celebrated. 1995, the Americans brought out, the publishers brought out a facsimile edition, which means an exact replica of the 1895 edition. I have a copy of that. It cost me a cool $30. I bought it in Los Angeles. Very expensive, but it is a collector's item. William James. Emma Calve, the best known opera singer of her time, soprano. Born in France, her genius was recognized by her parents, who brought her to Italy, to a city called Milano. Milano is even today considered the center of operatic music of the West. They have a very famous opera house, La Scala. She learned music there and became the lead singer. A count of Italy fell in love with her, a nobleman. They got married. They had a daughter. But Emma Calve was a genius, and living with geniuses is no joke. Don't ever marry a genius. There was one genius in Bangalore. He told his wife one day, "Can I borrow your diamond ear studs?" She asked him why. "No, just like that. I want your diamond studs." She thought he is going to get it cleaned up. You know, diamond studs have a tendency to gather oil when ladies apply oil to their faces. In the evening, he came back and told his wife, "Lalita, today, thanks to your diamond studs, I have proved the diamond is another form of carbon." "Why? What did you do?" "I burnt them on a stove." Diamond studs being burnt on a stove. Who was the genius? C.V. Raman. And Lalita later used to say, it is impossible to live with a genius like that. You never know how they are going to behave. So the marriage ended in a divorce, not Raman's. This marriage ended in a divorce. Now her whole life was centered on her daughter. She got an invitation from Metropolitan Opera House in New York to play the role of Carmen in a very famous opera by Bizet of the same name. She came to New York, stayed in Waldorf Astoria, 2 suites, one for her, one for her daughter and governess. Every evening she used to go to the La Scala, to Metropolitan Opera House, and then finish the singing, come back in the evening to be with her daughter. One evening between acts, she went to the green room to touch up her face when she got a message that for no reason whatsoever, her child had collapsed in the hotel and died. It was a big shock. She collapsed. The opera had to be cancelled that day. In a matter of a month, she tried to commit suicide thrice by slashing her wrists. The governess of the child rescued her. Swamiji was in Chicago at that time. So somebody suggested to Emma, "Why don't you go and meet Swami Vivekananda?" She came to Chicago, went to the house of the Hales. They were thrilled that the great Emma Calve is coming to their home. They took her upstairs to Swamiji's room and told her, "Don't enter the room until he calls you inside." She stood at the door. Swamiji was writing something with a bent head. After a few minutes, without raising the head, he said, "What an atmosphere of sorrow you bring with you, my child." Emma broke down. She came into the room, sat opposite Swamiji, went on crying for 10 minutes. All that grief of 1 month poured out of her. Swamiji did not even lift his head. When she stopped crying, he looked up into her eyes and went on telling her all the incidents of her life which she had never told anybody else. She had not told her parents, she had not told her husband. She asked him, "How do you know all this, Swamiji?" "My dear child, when I look into your eyes, I can read your whole life like an open book. The sorrow you are suffering from is very great. The loss is irreplaceable. But don't you see, the talent you have is a gift from the divine. You should not take it away from the public." She asked him, "What should I do, Swami?" He said, "Go back to the theatre. At the end of any performance, when the audience gives you a standing ovation, silently send it up to the memory of your daughter. This way, you will live in the memory of your child." She says, "I got a new life that day." In her autobiography, she refers to all this. She became a very, very close companion of Swami Vivekananda. She has come to Bengaluru several times, and she has told the local people there about Swamiji's life in New York and nearby places. Emma Calve. Ella Wheeler Wilcox, a poet whose husband was a very rich man, stockbroker. 1894, there was a market crash in New York. They lost everything. They became destitute. Now they had to survive on the occasional poems written by Ella, published in New Yorker magazine. One evening they were going for a walk in New York when they saw in the panel in the window of a shop, Swami Vivekananda will be giving a lecture on this topic, such and such a place. Entrance, 25 cents per head. She says, "I asked the man whose name I bear, can we spare 50 cents? He nodded his head. We went there, paid the money, sat in the hall. Swami Vivekananda came, spoke for an hour and a half. I went on looking at the face of the man whose name I bear." She never said husband. "The man whose name I bear." It slowly relaxed. A smile broke out on his face, and he listened to Swamiji with great absorption. After the lecture, we came out to the street, started walking. My husband's silence was too sacred. I didn't want to break it. Suddenly he stopped and said, "You know, Ella, there is still hope." Do you think Swami Vivekananda was speaking to all of you? No, he was speaking to me. The whole lecture was meant for me. And the next day onwards they recovered. So she has written several poems in memory of Swami Vivekananda. And they always used to remember Swamiji as the one who revived their spirits and revived their life. Dora Rothelsberger, a society lady who helped Swamiji organize lots of lectures. Efficient manager. She did the managerial job. Harriet Monroe, another poet who attended Swamiji's lectures. She has also written several poems about Swami Vivekananda. Sister Devamata, Laura Glenn of Detroit. She attended Swamiji's lectures in Detroit. Later she came to New York, but then something happened. She went back to her city of Detroit, got absorbed in her family life. Laura Glenn. Only later, when the youngest disciple of Swamiji, Swami Paramananda, came to Boston to establish Vedanta Society of Boston, did she go and meet him, talk to him, and then under his advice, she came to Bengaluru. She was ordained as a brahmacharini, became Sister Devamata. She was sent to Madras to assist Swami Ramakrishnananda set up the Ramakrishna Mutt in Madras. She spent 2 years there and she wrote a book, Days in an Indian Monastery, which gives you the whole story of how the Madras Mutt came into being. What is it these people saw in Swami Vivekananda is a puzzle to us even today. Malvina Hoffman, a sculptor, she had seen Swamiji, so making a bust of him was no problem. But by merely looking at the pictures of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother Sharda Devi, she was able to make busts out of them. All the three are to be seen in Vedanta Society of New York even today. They are preserved there because they were by Malvina Hoffman, who had seen Swami Vivekananda. Emma Thursby, a famous opera singer as well as a singer of ballads. Do you know what is meant by a ballad? No? A ballad is a song with a message. In the good old days in England, many people used to go from village to village singing ballads about the ancient kings, their exploits, their bravery, and the villagers would feed them, would give them money. Wandering singers. The modern version of them can be seen today in Bengal, the Baul musicians. Incidentally, a few years ago there was a conference of Baul singers in Bangalore, and we were able to hear Baul singing in the purest form. Sri Ramakrishna was very fond of the Baul music. The Bauls are Vaishnavas. They always go in pairs, husband and wife. They have only one ektara, that single stringed instrument which Meera also used to have, ektara. Stringing that and playing on that, they would sing songs of spirituality, and while singing they would go on dancing. They would whirl around once, whirl around in the opposite direction, take 2 steps forward. Come back 1 step, again whirl around twice, take 2 steps forward. So that people could stop and listen to them. And Sri Ramakrishna was very fond of one particular Baul song which became a rage in Prashanti Kutiram for almost 10 years. Tubudu rup shagore amar mon tolatol patal kunjle. This is the way they used to sing, melodious tune. Thakur himself would stand up in his room, sing it and go on whirling like bowls. There is a modern day version of these balladeers in the United States. Have you heard of Joan Baez? No? Generation gap. Have you heard of Martin Luther King?
Yes.
The civil rights movement. You remember? There was a group of 100,000 Americans represented by all the groups, ethnic groups in the United States, including the WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. They made a march to along Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House to give a representation to Nixon, to stop the war, to give rights to the blacks. They sang a song at that time. Do you remember? They sang a song. Became very famous even in India. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. What is the Indian version? Hum honge kam. Same song. That is a ballad. Ballad with a message. Then came the Vietnam War. How many American soldiers died in the Vietnam War? So somebody came up with a beautiful ballad. Pete Seeger, he recently passed away last month in the United States. He composed a song. Where have all the flowers gone? Where have all the flowers gone? So on and on it goes until you come to the last stanza. Where have all the young men gone? They have all gone to war. Will they ever return? Will they ever return? American mothers who had lost their sons in the war used to cry like anything. That is what made the President of the United States withdraw the soldiers from Vietnam. These are ballads, and she was a singer like that. She could sing ballads beautifully. And Swamiji, whenever she came to New York, Swamiji would invite her to his room and make her sing all these songs. Sara Bull, a remarkable lady from Boston. At the age of 16, she said she is in love and she wants to marry Ole Bull, the most famous violinist of the Western world. The whole of Chicago, the whole of Boston was shocked. Why? She was 16, he was 58. But very tough girl, she married him. Ole Bull was a very rich person. He owned an island in the state of Norway, country of Norway. He was a Norwegian. They went and settled down there. They had a daughter. 10 years later, when Ole Bull passed away, she inherited all his property, came back with her daughter and the property to Boston, constructed a big house, started living there, which became the center of attraction for a large number of philosophers. You know, Boston is a twin city of Cambridge, which has Harvard University, MIT, and other places. So, full of philosophers. She herself dabbled in theosophy. But when the scandal broke out, she left theosophy and she was looking for a teacher when she got a letter from her friend Sarah Farmer asking her to come to Green Acre to attend that conference. You remember I told you about that? April 1894. There she met Swamiji. He invited him to Boston, and it is in her house that William James met Swami Vivekananda. She became the manager of Swami Vivekananda, and we owe a lot to her. Later, Swamiji gave her initiation and a new name, Dhira Mata, the bold mother. It is with her money donation that all the buildings of the Bengaluru Mutt complex were constructed. Another lady from England donated money with which the site was purchased. You can see how many of these people came to the help of Swami Vivekananda. More about her later. Josephine MacLeod of New York. Her elder sister Betty, who was earlier Betty Sturgis, the wife of Sturgis. When Sturgis passed away, she got engaged to this gentleman, Francis Leggett, and they got married later in Paris. And she had a daughter by the earlier marriage, Alberta. The four of them, and there was another boy by name Frank. The whole family became devotees of Swami Vivekananda. You will hear more of them later. There is one thing interesting about Josephine. People used to ask her, Tantine, the French were auntie, how old are you? She would think for some time and say, 8 years old. What do you mean 8 years? Oh, don't you know? I count my date of birth as the date on which I met Swami Vivekananda for the first time in New York. She says, what loyalty? She says, this was my second birth. And you know what she said about the first lecture she heard from Swamiji? The first sentence he said was truth. Second sentence he said was truth. The whole lecture was truth. Afterwards, whenever he spoke, I listened to him. It was all truth, truth, and nothing else but truth. They are not members of our culture. They had no idea of our philosophy. But look at this loyalty which they developed to him. What was there in him? Most of them said there must be some divine power working behind him. Today we have to accept that fact. Swamiji himself used to say, there is something working behind me, pushing me along. You will hear more about them later. Nikola Tesla. Any electrical engineer here? Anybody who has studied physics? He is the inventor of alternating current technology. An emigre from Hungary, settled in New York. He used to attend Swamiji's lectures occasionally. One day he came and told Swamiji, Swamiji, I have started working out a basic hypothesis to show that mass and energy are equivalent to each other. But he could not complete it. Meanwhile, he was taken away by George Westinghouse to Chicago to start off alternating current technology in the Westinghouse Corporation. Nikola Tesla. You know how many patents he had? 700 patents. And did not have business sense, couldn't make much money. He died a pauper. He is a very famous personality in electrical engineering. And today, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, IEEE, has recognized his worth. A magnetic coil is now called Tesla coil. You know transformer? A transformer coil is called Tesla coil. And his name has been given to the unit of magnetic field strength. Electrical engineers remember him all the time now. Swamiji had met him, he had met Swamiji. What discussions they used to have on science. And Tesla used to be surprised at Swamiji's knowledge of physics and science. This is Nikola Tesla. April 1895. New York became very hot as Madras. You know, New York in summer can be very, very humid. Sweaty like Kolkata, Bombay and other places. Swamiji's disciples started going away to the mountains, one after the other, Adirondacks mountains. It was suggested to him to suspend his classes and to resume it in September. Swamiji said, all right, I'll go to England, I have the invitation, I'll come back in September, continue the classes. Meanwhile, one of his students, disciples, Miss Dutcher, came forward and said, I have a cottage in Thousand Island Park. Give me 2 months' time. I'll get the cottage renovated and add a few more rooms. Then all of us can go and spend 2 months there in a retreat. Everybody agreed. 12 of them agreed. Swamiji said, fine, but what do I do in the meanwhile? 2 months. The Leggett family, Francis Leggett, told him, we have this cottage in Camp Percy, upstate New York, beautiful place. Why not we go and live there for 2 months? You can see how beautiful it is. The mountains in the distance, the forest area, the lake with boating facility, and lots of places where he could go for a walk. Those 2 months were the most restful period for Swami Vivekananda. He enjoyed his time. One afternoon after lunch, he told the family, I'll go for a walk. He went out for a walk. Clouds had gathered. It was threatening to rain. Josephine was watching from the window of the cottage. She saw Swamiji coming and he stood at that fork spot still, rigid. She was wondering what is happening. And then the rain started pouring. Swamiji got completely wet. Josephine took an umbrella, ran to him, held the umbrella over his head. It rained for half an hour. At the end of that, the rain stopped. 10 minutes later, Swamiji opened his eyes, looked around. He asked Josephine, why is the ground so wet? Swamiji, it has been raining. Was it raining? Oh, I am sorry, Yum Yum. That is what he used to call her, Yum Yum. I am sorry, Yum Yum, I didn't notice it. She said, how is it possible? You know, I had been pestering my guru for a long time for the experience of Nirvikalp Samadhi, where I am lost in Brahman. Today he got me that experience. I was completely lost to the world. Josephine says, how can you understand this person? Does he belong to this world or has he come from some other world? Sri Ramakrishna always felt that he is one of the Saptarshis, 7 rishis, who has come to earth in this incarnation. So he really belongs to the world of the rishis according to Sri Ramakrishna. By the month of June, the cottage was ready. 1000 Island Park. Today this cottage is the property of the Vedanta Society of New York, and it has been renamed Vivekananda Cottage. You know, the river St. Lawrence takes off from the 5 Great Lakes and it starts flowing northeast towards Canada. Alright? From Canada it goes to Atlantic Ocean. This is the place where it enters Canada, the border between US and Canada. At that spot, the river splits itself into thousands of branches. People said, when we went there, people told us 1,720 branches. That means there are 1,720 islands. Some of the islands are pieces of rock. Some of them are big enough for people to live in. Lots of people have their villas there and they travel by boat. And it is a beautiful spot. Half of it is in the US, the other half is in Canada. I tried very hard in the town of Thousand Island Park to locate this cottage. I went on asking for Miss Dutcher's cottage. They said, never heard of it. When I came back, I happened to go to Kolkata. I met Marie-Louise Burke, Sister Gargi, the one who has written those 6 volumes. I told her, sister, I had been to Thousand Island Park. I asked for Miss Dutcher's cottage. Nobody knew about it. You stupid fellow. Why did you not ask for Vivekananda cottage? That name is gone. It is now Vivekananda cottage. The room on the top to the left and the room at the bottom on the left were the 2 new rooms added. The upstairs room was given to Swamiji. There are 2 porches. The first one is a foyer. The top one is a real porch. That is where Swamiji used to give talks. There were 10 people in the camp. 2 days after the camp started, 2 girls came from Detroit. It was raining very heavily. And they came there searching for Swamiji. Ultimately, they were told there is one weird character staying with a few Americans in that building. Go and inquire there. They came there and rang the bell. Swamiji himself opened the door. They said, we have come to see you. He said, my poor children, you have come late in the night, it is raining. However, come inside, take shelter. Tomorrow, I will tell the other people, if they are interested, they can accept you as participants. So next morning, everybody accepted the 2 of them. One of them, Christine Green Stidell, later became Sister Christine. She dedicated her whole life to the establishment of the famous Nivedita schools in India. Her whole life was devoted to Swamiji. And Swamiji used to call her my sweet Christine. He was very fond of her. So every morning and evening, they used to gather there. Swamiji used to give lectures. They have been taken down. They have come to us in the form of a small book, Inspired Talks. If you read that, you do feel inspired. There were a few occasional light moments also. One day Swamiji announced, I am going to cook lunch for all of you tomorrow. So there was excitement in the camp. Swamiji is going to cook lunch for us tomorrow. He cooked lunch, asked all of them to sit. He served them. They started eating. And one of them in her reminiscences says, water started coming through our eyes, water started coming through our nostrils, water started coming through our ears, water started coming through our skin. The food was so hot. But say, who are we to complain? Sister Christian later said, if the great Swami Vivekananda cooks for us, the least we can do is to eat it. From that day, they were very careful to see that Swamiji does not cook. Once in a way, Swamiji would say, tomorrow I'll cook. So there would be a groan. Why a groan? Because of the fact that he would utilize all the vessels in the kitchen. And somebody else had to wash it. Who was supposed to wash it? His companion Leon Landsberg. I showed you his picture yesterday. He used to groan, oh no, who will do the washing? You, of course, Swamiji would say. And any time Swamiji would say, I want to go to the kitchen to cook, somebody would stop him. Ask him a question, draw him away. One day he realized, these people are trying to, avoid me cooking. He said, all right, you have a problem, you have a question, come into the kitchen. While I am cooking, I will answer your question. So there were moments of joy, moments of happiness, light moments, evening walks together. They say it was almost like paradise. After 2 months, Swamiji announced, now I have to go to England, August. I have an invitation from somebody there. This is Sister Christine. You are going to see her later. Edward Sturdy of England had been sending invitation after invitation to Swamiji to New York. He had gone to India in 1893 when Swamiji was in Chicago. He was earlier a theosophist, later got interested in Vedanta. So Swamiji announced, I want to go to England. Immediately, the Leggett family said, we will also come along. Why? We want to show you Europe. Swamiji said yes. So they went to Europe first, they travelled over Europe part of it, and then they left Swamiji in England. Edward Sturdy received him, took him home, and later to his house in the northern part of England, and the two of them spent a lot of time discussing Vedanta, and Sturdy organized a few lectures by Swami Vivekananda. Only one important incident happened at that particular time, which I am going to mention. That happened in the month of November. If you ever go to England, please don't do so in the month of October, November, December. That is the foggy season. And London fog is very dangerous, extremely dangerous. I was in London, I have been in London only once. That unfortunately was in the month of November. I had to go to the hospital to see somebody, and I had been told by my relatives, come back home before 7 o'clock. But in the hospital I got held up. 7:30 I left the hospital. I took the underground and came to Finsbury Park station. I got out of the station, came to the ground, fog. I could not see my own fingers with a stretched hand. And I had to go home, which was 5 minutes walk. On the way there was a clock tower, Crouch End. Now I had to walk, avoiding the clock tower, groping in the dark. I was not the only one, so many people are groping in the dark. After half an hour, I made it home. Then my relatives scolded me and said, did we not tell you? You should be home by 7 o'clock. You know how many people have lost their lives in London fog because they are not able to see and they fall into the Thames River. And Thames River can be extremely cold around that season. In that season, a lady, a noble woman in London, Lady Isabel Margesson, organized a parlor talk by Swami Vivekananda in her house at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Only friends were invited, not public. 30 of them were invited. There was one Irish lady in that group, school teacher, Margaret Noble. She was born in Ireland in Dungannon. Her father was a Christian clergyman. He brought her up as a God-fearing personality under Christian principles. She had one sister, one brother. Very, very nice family. But when her father died, the mother brought her children to London, where Margaret Noble became a school teacher. When she was a school teacher, she got engaged to be married to a young man. But the marriage could not take place because at that time there was a war between England and Russia. I think it is called the Crimean War. It was fought on the fields of Russia. The young man was drafted into the army, went there, and he died in that. Margaret decided to remain a spinster. She never got married. And she said, I will dedicate my life to the education of children. Have you heard of the Crimean War? That war threw up a world-famous personality. There was a British lady at that time who used to have a magic lantern, the lamp, go around in the nights looking for wounded soldiers, whether British or Russian. With the help of a few volunteers, she would bring them to her tent and she would look after them. She became famous as the Lady of the Lamp. Do you know who she is? Florence Nightingale. Have you heard of her? Yes. The one who started the nursing movement. You know, we have had a few girls in IISc batches who have done nursing courses. And they told me that when they graduate, get their certificate, they have to take an oath of honesty in the name of Florence Nightingale. We swear that, etc., etc., etc. Finally, in the name of Florence Nightingale, Lady of the Lamp. She became famous in the Crimean War. So, Margaret also came for the lecture, and she has left behind her reminiscences. In one of her reminiscences, she makes the following remark. These may not be the exact words, but this is the essence. It was a cold, dreary, foggy November afternoon when 30 of us gathered in the parlor of the house of Lady Isabel Margesson to listen to Swami Vivekananda of India. Swami Vivekananda came to the parlor, sat and started speaking. In 10 minutes, London was forgotten, the fog was forgotten, all of us were transported to the upper reaches of the Himalayas. He kept us there for 2 hours and brought us back to the cold, dreary, foggy London evening. First time she heard Swami Vivekananda. She is the person who later became Sister Nivedita. I hope you have heard of her. Sister Nivedita. One of the most famous personalities in the field of female education in India. It did not register. She didn't fall at the feet of Swamiji immediately because she was of a very critical mind. She would not accept anything unless she had tested it and weighed it. She kept quiet. Now Swamiji decided that he has started his working in London. He has to go back to US because there is unfinished work. He wants somebody from India to help him. He sent a message to Brahmananda, asked him to send Swami Shardananda to London. As soon as he came to know Shardananda has left Kolkata, Swamiji returned to New York. Now he didn't go anywhere. No more touring of lectures. He stuck to New York and started giving a series of lectures which have come down to us in the form of those 4 books. Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, Jnana Yoga. They can be seen in our bookshop. They are the greatest contribution of Swami Vivekananda. 4 months, January to April, completely devoted these 4 lectures. And the group required a stenographer. Luckily at that time, an Englishman had come to New York. This is a photo of London. Fez cap. So you give fez cap, very warm, you know. This is Sister Nivedita, Margaret Noble. Josiah John Goodwin, an Englishman, a stenographer, court stenographer, only son of a widowed mother, father was no more. To earn money, he came to New York. You see, even in those days, it was felt that if you want to earn money, go to United States. That is a principle even today followed by many of our people. He became a court stenographer. And you know, court stenographers had to be very, very efficient. You must have seen this in movies, or if you have read Earl Stanley Gardner's Perry Mason novels, you would know that. A lawyer would say, Your Honor, can we go back? I want to know what exactly my learned colleague has asked the witness and what answers he has given. Then the stenographer has to go back, reproduce it exactly, verbatim, word by word, no mistakes anywhere, because it is court case. In a court case, you can't have wishy-washy things. He was an expert. Dr. Guernsey met him and told him, we want a stenographer to take down Swamiji's lectures. He is in the habit of speaking fast. He said, all right, I'll attend the lecture, take it down stenography, and type 5 copies, $10. $10 in those days was a pretty huge amount. They agreed. So Goodwin came for the first talk, took down. After 3 days, he came with 5 copies. When Guernsey wanted to give him money, he said, no, I don't want your money. Can I join your group? And he became the right-hand personality of Swami Vivekananda. Today, all the lectures of these 4 books, plus the other famous book, Lectures from Colombo to Almora, I will tell you about it tomorrow. We owe our gratitude to Goodwin for all these things. It is he who had taken down the whole lot, and later they got printed. He came to India. Actually, he died in India, in Uttarakhand. So Swamiji completed the job, and in April announced that he has to go back to India via Europe. Americans were rather upset, unhappy, but they said, please promise that you will come back. He said, I will try to come back again. As soon as Swamiji announced that he is returning to India, a group of people gathered around him. The legate family and all the others gathered around him, and they said, Swamiji, you please go to England. Whatever work you have to do, you finish it. Then please join us in Paris. We will go around Europe once again and return to England. So Swamiji agreed, and with Josiah John Goodwin, he returned to London. He had some brushing up to do. Shardananda had already come. He had to train Shardananda to do the job properly. Meanwhile, he was very worried about the American work. He didn't want that to collapse. So he suggested to Shardananda, Sharad, why don't you go to United States? I will ask somebody else to come and take over London. And he wrote to Brahmananda to send Kali, Abhedananda, to come to London. So Abhedananda left India and Shardananda left for United States, and Swamiji left for Paris. He came to Paris. Goodwin decided to stay back with his mother, because Goodwin knew with Swamiji he is to go back to India. After all this arrangement, Swamiji came to Paris, where he was greeted by the legate family and a couple of others. So we leave them there, and tomorrow we bring Swamiji back to India. Day after tomorrow, we take him back to US, to California, and the day after that, we will bring him back to Europe, and the last day will be the story of the last 1.5 years of his life. What an extraordinary life it is. You know, before I retired from IIT Madras, some of my students caught hold of me there. Sir, before you go away, why don't you repeat to us the life of Swami Vivekananda, but this time in full detail. So I gave lectures for 2 semesters, every Friday evening 1.5 hours. You know how many lectures ultimately? 46 lectures on the life of Swamiji. And the parting gift from my students there was, we are still not satisfied. 46 lectures into 1.5 hours. How many? 69 hours. They were still not satisfied. Life is full of surprises. All you have to do is to pick up the latest books which are coming about Swami Vivekananda. You will see every book has some new material or other. Okay? We close here with a prayer. Harihi Om Tat Sat.
Harihi Om Tat Sat.
Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.